All right, Addison Williams and Jeff Hull here again to dispel myths about the fitness and health industry, things that the mainstream health media won't tell you. In today's topic, Jeff?
Today we really want to talk about Russian versus American weightlifting movements. There's a lot of confusion about this as to why there's differences, and then mostly just how the Cold War in general shaped the modern athlete, and especially the modern CrossFitter, Addison. I think that's something that the listeners at home could really use some. Listeners and the viewers at home could really use some background information on.
So a little bit of context to start with then. Most people are used to hearing about the Russian kettlebell swing versus the American kettlebell swing. And from my understanding, it's called the Russian one because you're rushing it so fast, you stop before it gets overhead, right? No.
So that's one of those misconceptions that we'd like to clear up. It's good that we're starting with this. It's good lead in. So Russia is actually a country. I did some research on this. A lot of the people out there may not know this, but Russia is actually a fairly large chunk of real estate, sort of on the left-hand side, or if you're facing north, it's on the left-hand side of Finland.
Okay. No, that's where the Soviet Union is.
Yeah. Russia is another name for that. Also known as Prussia or the CCCP.
Oh, CCCP is right. That's the Soviet reunion.
Yeah. Well, and they actually got their own alphabet, so that can get quite confusing as well. So
what do they do?
Often they spell Soviet with a C.
Naturally, right.
Naturally.
Well, why do they lift differently, Jeff? What makes them different?
Well, there's a lot of things, right? Number one, they're a lot shorter. They're significantly shorter people.
And that's just data. We can't argue with that.
Right. That was one of the things I learned when I was Googling around. Also, it's a lot colder. They're a lot further north. Actually, another way to think of it, because it's quite broad, I did notice this when I was looking. If you get a globe rather than a flat map, you'll notice they're actually bloody close to Alaska. So think about that climate and how you would lift if you were in that climate. You're wearing a lot of heavy clothing, a lot of baggy.
I wouldn't. Yeah. My jacket's so big that I can't get the kettlebell all the
movement.
way.
You get up about here and you're like, oh, my jacket might rip if I go any further. And
so you don't push the kettlebell all the way overhead.
Yeah.
Okay, now it's making a lot more sense.
Close to Alaska, actually, you can almost see him from Sarah Palin's house.
Right
across the street.
So if I wanted to do the Russian movement for a lot of things, that would be where I just didn't go over the head. So I'd be like a Russian clean and jerk would be like I just get it to my chest and just pop it off, but I don't go overhead and press out because that's not Russian.
Yeah, we wouldn't call it the clean and jerk though, because the jerk has a different meaning in Russia, and I won't go into that. It's not very clean. Not very clean. But Russian jerks, that's a whole different. Don't Google that. So also another restricted movement that we quite often see that's clearly Russian, we haven't talked about it yet, is the Romanian deadlift.
Oh, the Russians call it the Romanian deadlift? It's like some sort of joke?
Well, the Romans did, clearly, and they were bloody part of Russia. They got absorbed into the one of the seas. Okay,
so the Romanian deadlift, the Turkish get-up, the Bulgarian split squat, those are all Russian movements?
Hungarian squat clean.
And what's the
basically anything that has got a different name in front of it,
different country,
or originated somewhere outside the United States.
So what's the American get up? The Turkish get up is a Russian movement. What's the American get up?
It's a lot slower. First of all,
you get out of bed, go to your 9-to-5 job, and drink a coffee,
and then you get busy, do it.
Right, that's the American get-up.
Yep.
We don't waste no time. Turkish get-ups are just silly.
So we're off. It's important to understand why, just how these things bled over, right? So number one, a lot of Americans returned from Russia after the war.
Which war?
And they brought a lot, the big one, the Great War.
The Cold War?
Yeah, the Cold War.
Because it's cold in Russia.
Right. You're tracking quite well. So once they returned from the Cold War, they brought back a lot of those movements. They brought back a lot of the influence. A lot of them married Russian ladies on the internet, and a lot of those ladies brought across the smaller, shorter movements because they were smaller, shorter folks. The other influences, a lot of them have been actually in Hollywood. We've had a lot of. I've read an article in the New York Times recently that said a lot of Russian actors have influenced our culture and our elections specifically. So you've got your Russian actors, and a lot of them are very big in the fitness community, such as I think the most famous Russian actor of all time is obviously Ivan Drago.
Yeah, and we saw a lot about how he worked out in the Rocky movie.
We did, right?
So,
and
like, for example, and they were comparing the American and the Russian movements right then and there. Right. Like, the Russian fitness training was, like, the Russian run was on a treadmill, whereas Rocky would do the American run. Well, no, he would just run around the... Yeah. It was like, it's still a cold campsite, but, you know, and then he would punch like a...
cold as Russia.
Right. I don't know if they verified that with a thermometer. I thought it looked pretty cold.
I've been to Philly, and it's not anywhere near as cold as Russia. But anyway, we're off
track.
other
famous Russian influences on lifting, on acting?
Schwarzenegger.
All right, another famous Russian.
Clearly famous Russian.
Obviously a Russian accent.
Daniel Day-Lewis, originally Russian. And also Daniel Day-Lewis's role in Red Dawn was very influential. The ability to take over the Colorado Rockies. If you can clear out the Rockies, you know, I've been up in Colorado. There's some wild folks. If you can dominate that geography so quickly from Russia, then obviously, you know, you're doing bloody high cardio.
So
a lot of cardio.
Let's talk about some little known facts. I just read this on the internet. Russia, because it's so cold and dark, that's why they're always inside lifting. They're not out doing dumb stuff like running ultra marathons because too cold, you freeze and die. Right. But they're like, oh, I can lift, the kettlebell inside the building all day because I've got a heater in here.
As long as
they have a heater.
Once again, as long as I don't swing too hard, or I'll rip my coat.
Right, and then you'd freeze, and then it just ruins the whole point. Yeah, but you can't run in the coat. That would just be dumb.
So just getting back to Ivan Drago, too, you know, and his influence, right? Clearly a dominant athlete, Ivan.
Rocky 3, 4? Yeah, it's 4. Right.
Where he kills Apollo Creed with superior punching power.
Right, and they were pretty aware he was going to do
concise. Yeah, I mean, we all saw that coming, and that was based on his training routine. So, again, influence of Russian movements on American movements. I mean, what do you want to be? Do you want to be Apollo in that film, or do you want to be Ivan Drago?
I'd rather be Ivan Drago
so a lot of athletes,
you don't want to die.
Right, a lot of athletes watched that, right, during the formative periods of the CrossFit culture and said, clearly we need to train like Drago.
So,
big influencer there.
Right, because Rocky came out during early CrossFit days. So, what can we learn? Why do Americans lift poorly? Why do we want to do the worst form? Why do we want to not do the Russian version if it would make us more like Ivan Drago and not like Apollo? Okay,
that's bringing us back to the clear purpose of this informative podcast. What you really want to do is mix it up, right? So you want to have the American movement, which is the full extension, the full... Not the Hungarian or the Bulgarian or the Romanian.
Lithuanian.
Stay away from that. Lithuanians, I used to call them. What you want to do is you want to get the full American movement with the maximum amount of extension, but then you also want to train the Russian movement just in case, you know, you ever end up fighting for your life against Apollo Creed and you need a short, explosive, powerful...
Right, well-rounded athlete.
Yeah.
Okay, so... Let's talk about why doesn't CrossFit just use the Russian movement? Why isn't that the standard? I feel like that's a more important thing. What does CrossFit have against the Soviet Union and Russia? Is it politics? Is it?
Well, some of it's licensing issues.
Oh, right. You have to pay for the copyright to use the Russian version. Yeah. They've got trademarks and whatnot. Right. So Russians are obviously not going to do the American one because that's going to be proprietary as well. It's like Windows and Mac.
Yeah, no.
You don't put a Windows app on a MacBook, right? So,
no, but a lot of us do, right? So a lot of us do use the Russian movements, and it's part of being part of the community. The CrossFit community itself, community is a very Soviet concept, right? Community, they were big on community in the Soviet Union. They're actually big on it that it's almost problematic.
Right, they said you're going to be a part.
Communityism became kind of a thing. They were like, let's all get together and
take the fruits of your labor and defeat the capitalist pigs.
Destroy the capitalist
pigs. Very CrossFit in culture.
Yeah. Right, so that's why we have adopted a lot of the Russian movements. I mean, you go to a lot of gyms these days in certain states, you can get locked up for doing Russian movements still.
Yeah, and I heard Facebook is trying to kick back against advertising Russian movements.
Russian movements.
Yeah, because a lot of gyms were saying, hey, we offer the Russian version. They said, you're trying to influence the CrossFit Open,
Right.
trying to have a unfair influence.
That's one of the best places to interact with Russian actors, actually.
On the internet?
Is on social media.
Facebook? Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go ahead. We always want to end with a takeaway. What's our words of advice for our athletes out there wondering how they get international on their exercises? What do you want to tell them, Jeff?
I'd like to tell them to look for a lot of WODs that have a lot of words they can't spell in them, because if you can't spell it, chances are it's probably Russian. Look for weird backwards S's or B's or R's with little hyphens above them. Those are the ones that
The
give you
Cyrillic
real-
alphabet.
Sometimes the knowledge in here is, whew,
It's overwhelming. All right, well,
Cyrillic alphabet.
You have it.
Short names, short exercises, short movements. You know, get away from that whole joint mobility myth and just bang it out. Put a big coat on, go to town.
that's our next topic is the joint mobility myth. Thank you.